Fidelity actually did a study trying to determine, okay, what are our top performing accounts? And all the trillions of dollars that we house, which accounts are the top performing? And what you may be surprised to find is that it was not actively managed funds. It was not aggressive single stock investors that were picking the number one best high flash stock. Do you know what the number one top performing accounts Fidelity found were?
Abandoned accounts.
They were the accounts that people had completely forgotten about, accounts that people didn't even realize that they still had. They even took it a step further and said that oftentimes some of their best performing accounts are estate settlement accounts where someone passes away and it might take 5-10 years to find the beneficiaries or to settle the estate or work through the probate process. Those accounts, the accounts where nothing at all was happening, were often the top performing accounts. Doing nothing was better than folks who actively try to do a lot of stuff inside their investment account.
This is almost because we, instead of having a good plan that works, before, during, and after, it seems like everybody's out there looking for the reaction they can do, and they usually are working against themselves. This is to the point that if you think about great investors in American history, the late Charlie Munger, very popular. Him and Warren Buffett built something incredible with Berkshire Hathaway. He has a saying, Bo, he's turned a famous saying upside down. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, oftentimes people say, hey, don't just stand there, do something. We've all heard that expression. Well, Charlie said when it comes to investing, you want to do the exact opposite. He says, don't just do something, stand there. Don't do anything. Don't take action, because oftentimes no action is better than taking action and making the wrong decision. We see emotional investors fall into that trap all the time.
Okay, so we just detailed in great detail that the average investor is horrible at investing. But the good news is you can go hire somebody. I'm sure a professional money manager is going to be even better because they have all this education. So they've overcome that part of it. But they charge you fees.
So they must
you have to be
good.
getting something for this. So how about professional investors? How do they do?
Yeah, when we think about professional folks who do this for a living, would you believe that according to Morningstar, only 42% of actively managed mutual funds beat their passive counterparts, just the index itself? Or what about this from Spiva? 90% of actively managed U.S. funds, 9 out of 10, have outperformed compared to the S&P 500 over the last 15 years.
They underperformed.
Have underperformed compared to the S&P 500 over the last 15 years. And if the New York Times, fewer than 5% of active U.S. stock fund managers have beat their benchmarks over the last 20 years. So even people who hold themselves out as being professionals, a very small fraction, a small percentage of them are even able to do better than their passive benchmark. So not even the professionals have figured this out. So what are we as investors supposed to do? How are we supposed to tackle this? How do we figure out how we should be investing our dollars?
I think it's interesting because you can imagine if we just showed you the average investor is horrible at this, the average professional investor is horrible at this, you can see how quickly there's some strategies that have shown up on social media. And that's what we want to cover today. 3 popular investment strategies that people get into. And one of them, probably the most popular that I've seen on my feeds, is VU for life.
That's it. Just buy it and hold it forever.
If you're new to this whole concept and you're like, what is VU? VU is the S&P 500. That's Vanguard's ETF. You could have said Fidelity's S&P 500 index fund. You could have said Charles Schwab's S&P 500. But VU for life is just the popular one that you see out there, probably because it rhymes with foo.
That's got to be. That's where all the assets come from.
Foo. But so you see that. This is basically just people saying, we'll buy this one holding, ride it all the way until we get to retirement. The other one is the 3-fund portfolio.
Yep.
Bo, this is interesting because it's typically going to have a lot of probably the S&P 500. It's going to have a lot of large cap.
Yep.
It's going to have some international. It might even have some bonds. We'll get into some of that. And then there's even Dave Ramsey. A lot of you guys have found us, and we appreciate you. Because you consider us kind of graduate level once you've kind of gotten out of debt. So Dave Ramsey has done a lot of good in the world of getting people out of debt that then it translates into a lot of people also following what does he do on investments. We want to go a little deeper and see what does that look like so you can figure out what do I need to be doing with my investment life.
So when we think about these 3 strategies, VU for life, some sort of 3-fund portfolio, or maybe following Dave Ramsey's suggested portfolio, the question becomes, well, how do we decide which ones are good, or how do we decide which ones we should use, or what are the things we ought to know about each of these different investing strategies or investing portfolios. So we want to evaluate them. We want to kind of walk you through the metrics that we would use as we're thinking about how to think about portfolios and how to think about putting our dollars to work. And so the evaluation metrics we're going to use is we're going to look at, okay, how are these allocated? How do each of them spread the assets out across different asset classes, different investments? How do each one of these portfolios attack risk? What would be the risk profile of these portfolios? And then ultimately, we're going to close out with performance. Okay, well, if we just take away everything, which one of these portfolios has performed best? Which one has performed worst? And then how can I use that? What should I take away? What should I know about that? So we're just going to kind of walk you through how we would think about these. So before you buy into any one of these strategies, it makes sense to understand, okay, what am I actually buying? What's the allocation? How are these assets inside of these funds, inside these portfolios, actually being invested?
Well, Boo, I mean,
boo. He's just coming, boo.
Boo with the boo. No, Bo, I just gave the insight that VOO for life is basically just buying the S&P 500. But we have our audience, there's 40% of you who come into us brand new all the time. We're using a lot of terms here, whether it's the VOO for life, whether it's the S&P 500. What is, when we say the S&P 500, what even is that?
It's literally the 500 largest publicly traded companies in the United States. So when you think about it, it's names you've heard of. It's the Home Depots, the Apples, the Alphabets, the Facebooks. It's those kinds of companies that comprise the S&P 500. And so what these ETFs like VOO do is they just try to mirror, they try to mimic it. It's a market capitalized weighted index. So the biggest companies have the highest percentage, and then the next biggest, all the way down to company number 500. That is what VOO invests in.
So primarily large U.S. companies.
That's right.
Maybe a little sliver of mid-caps as they're transitioning in their journey of growth from mid, but primarily this is a large cap holding index.
All right, now when we think about the 3-fund portfolio, it's a little bit different. Oftentimes, this is a mix of U.S. equities, international equities, and then some sort of bond funds or some sort of fixed income. And people will allocate according to their unique circumstances. So some people might go with like a 70, 15, 15, or some people might go with a 95, 5. For our illustrative purposes, for like a balanced, well-rounded portfolio, we're just going to assume for the 3-fund portfolio, we're going to use 3 Vanguard ETFs, 70% in VTI, just the total stock market index, 15% in the international VXUS, and then 15% in Vanguard's total bond, BND. So again, 3 ETFs across 3 different broad asset classes.
And by the way, this could change for you based upon what you know, but we chose 70, 15, 15. The disclaimer I'll say on this is your choice might be a little bit different on how much is risk on versus risk off.
And then if you listen to Dave Ramsey, if you've listened to any of his investing advice, he comes up with this idea. He says your portfolio just should be split equally between 4 different categories: growth and income, growth, aggressive growth, and international.
I'm surprised on international they didn't put growth on it, because it does feel like, and look, everybody knows who's followed our channel, we're not Ramsey haters.
We love Dave.
But it is, because like I said, he is the probably step number 1 if you're trying to get out of debt. If you've had ever a discipline issue, you have landed on the Ramsey reservation. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is no doubt about it. But it does concern me. I remember this isn't like something that came up last week. This has been decades in the making. And it's one of those things when I'm helping people manage money and I look at a portfolio, I pick on sometimes when I see a portfolio and I'm like, did you just choose anything and everything that had the word growth?
Just grow. That's all you want.
And I do feel like sometimes when I look at Dave's portfolio, and I don't know if they've considered updating it, but it does look like it is an exercise in growth and income. Mm-hmm. Well, growth and income is probably going to be, a balance of large cap, both value and growth holdings. Growth just means it's probably going to be on the aggressive side of the large cap holdings. Aggressive growth is probably going to be small cap or something like that, get you a little bit more growth by juicing the risk. And then international, I mean, just by its nature, international has a lot of growth components to it. So this thing seems like it is wild.
It's wild. And so what we said is, okay, Dave does not necessarily give specific fund recommendations, but we happen to know of some funds that would fall into these categories as Dave would qualify them.
Well, think about it. He has endorsed local providers.
Yep.
We've seen enough of those portfolios come across that we know kind of the fund companies that a lot of those ELPs are using. And then it's crazy if we don't mention, we live in the backyard.
Sure.
So we know people who have actually Ramsey 401ks. Yep. So these choices of funds probably aren't too far from what you've seen if you are in part of the Ramsey, network, or if you work with an endorsed local provider, you're probably seeing some of these funds.